Welcome to Charts This Week. My name's David Linton. I run Updata, and this week's edition for Monday, the 23rd of May, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at crude, as always. Brent crude now just nudging that $50 mark. And the big question is, will it be able to get through this psychologically important level? Correlation with the dollar is negative, as we expect. Commodities go up when the dollar falls, or vice versa. So it is interesting that we are just seeing this renewed strength in crude. But of course, the big thing we keep talking about is we are getting to the end of the seasonal adjustment, and we've gone on a bit further than the seasonality suggested based on previous years, but we are entering territory where the shape of the seasonality says that it'd be unlikely that we see crude going much higher at this time of year. So we still remain cautiously bullish, but at the same time we are, whilst we're above the cloud, but we do need to recognise that this period can be short-lived. Here it was last year, and around May, June time we started falling away in prices, what we would expect. So we do expect prices to come under some pressure. If we look at the 60-minute chart, this is the shorter term chart, of course. We have just turned into a bearish phase on the 60-minute chart, so that does tend to suggest that we'll have some falls this week, and the same on WTI. Of course, the targets on your Updata system, the T key, just press the T key for target, and we do have a downside target of 45.65 and an upside target of 52.65, which is not yet activated. We'd need a new high above that level to activate that. So at the moment, we probably would favour that downside target. And if we look at it on the WTI key, just press the T key again, and we see here we don't have the downside targets as clearly, and we need new high above 48.80 for that to be activated to above the 50 level. Of course, if you're trading crude in the very short term, take a look at the 1 minute chart. All this data is coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. T key again will just give us the trends and targets. Downward pressure, downside targets. We do have an upside target that's also not activated, so it does suggest we're going to see a bit of a pullback this week in crude prices. If we look at US gas, NatGas, below on the daily cloud, on the weekly cloud, below on the daily, and we are entering soon the time of year where gas prices fall away. So we just need to be aware of that. Of course, we are back above the cloud here. The T key will give you the trends and targets. Downside target that was given and met, but we don't have any new clear upside targets there. You might have to go to the 1 minute chart. If you're trading NatGas, this chart is brilliant anyway. And we don't have any clear upside targets here. If we just adjust the box size in this bottom right hand corner, it does suggest 221 is a thrust that we do have, but not enough other targets pointing there to give us a lot of confidence. If we take a look at European OTC markets and energy, MBP has had a really good recovery the last few weeks, but it is above the cloud for the first time in a very long time. Correlation with Brent kicking in, so that Brent strength, so the Brent chart here coming from Icon, the OTC coming from either the Updata energy feed or Trayport. And then if we look at the 60-minute chart, we see here that we are just heading below the cloud as well there. So that is just looking like we might see a bit of a pullback in gas prices. Of course, if you're trading MBP, this is MBP front month, press the T key again, and we see here we do have an upside target not activated, but quite a lot of downward pressure. So we just favour the downside in the very short term there. TTF, much the same. Lagging line hasn't quite got above the cloud the way it has in MBP. If we look at the 60-minute chart, we can just get some targets, press T, and we see here downside targets. There is some upward support. So gas prices having recovered. If we take a look at German power looking quite encouraging. The fact that we've come through this cloud, it's the first time in quite a while that we've come through the cloud here, and this is looking more convincing. So even if German power falls away, this 21 level is starting to look like a low point. And if we take a look at the 60-minute chart, press T for the targets, and we see here we do have some downside and upside targets, a fairly mixed picture. Could go either way, but quite a lot of strong support kicking in now for German power, so that's quite interesting. Of course, if you're trading German power short term, the 1-minute chart, just press the T key on your system and it gives you the trends and targets. And we're seeing 4 and 6 and 4% upside, so it's looking quite encouraging there for the moment. UK power just wandering above, and Nordic power looking quite strong there as well. This is the quarterly contracts. So if we take a look at Forex, here we see the dollar index. Again, these prices coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. We're seeing dollar index still in this bear trend on the daily, but on the 60-minute chart, it has got back into a bull trend. Just press the T key on your system, and we see here we did have quite a lot of downside targets here, but we are getting a bit of a recovery. There's resistance potentially to hit here, but we do have a new upside target, so keep an eye on that. Notice how this target here, given back in December, actually given and met. So just you can't ignore these targets. If we look at the euro, we're bullish above the cloud at the moment. This 111.30 level is pretty critical. 111.40, and then if we look at the 60-minute chart, in a very clear downtrend. So euro has this last week or so been falling away against the dollar. T key again will give us the targets. Downside target, we've got a cluster, 2 targets pointing to the same place. 110.02 is the target there. So 110 is where we'd expect it to go back to. So another 2 cents downside. And of course, if you're trading Forex shorter term, the 1-minute chart, again off Thomson Reuters Icon, and you might have to go to smaller box sizes, but this is where you get to see things playing out in real time. So that's quite powerful. If we then take a look at the sterling chart, here we see sterling is recovering above on the daily. On the 60-minute chart, we are just so the daily chart really going through a trend change there. 60-minute chart is just a little bit mixed. The T key will give us trends and targets. Downside target of 139.60, which given off the thrust we saw last time, but now we do have an upside target to 148.50. So sterling really is just starting to show some renewed medium-term strength, and just we need to be aware that it could go either way. Here we see it against the euro. So euro weakness really kicking in there against sterling, down to 76.50. We haven't seen those levels for quite a long time. If we go back, we're talking really about going back a few months there. And if we take a look at Norwegian kroner, holding up at about 9.35, not a lot of action there against the euro. The Swissy just strengthening a little bit against the euro there. And then if we look at sterling Swiss, sterling just recovering off that 135 low, now back to about 145, so that's quite good on the daily chart. If we take a last look at stock market indices, we see the S&P. I am still quite worried about this chart. If we look at the S&P, we went below the cloud quite convincingly. We've just sort of climbed back, failed to make a new high, and we're now back in the cloud. And price is just coming off again. And of course, May is not a great time of year, so we really do need to be just aware these lows still look like they could come under pressure. So it's bearish on the weekly, bullish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute chart. We do have a new upside target, but we need to go higher to activate that. So if the market could get above this sort of 2120 level, then that would be a very good sign, but it's really struggling to do that. And 2050 on the S&P is now a very critical level. We see here we've got these downside targets, 1975, 2000. So S&P is just really in the doldrums and struggling to make new highs. If we look at the NatGas chart is quite similar in that it's slightly different in terms of the weekly makeup. We are above the cloud. We haven't gone below the cloud quite convincingly there. But again, we have these downside targets. We are seeing sort of targets on both the US markets about 4 and 5% downside, so that is a little bit worrying. If we take a look at Europe, first of all, we start with the FTSE. These are my tracker charts, again, all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. Below on the weekly, so still looking pretty bearish. Downside targets here on the weekly. Really struggling on the short term as well. We do have an upside target in the medium term, but it's just really in the doldrums, FTSE. If we take a look at Xetra, the German DAX index, it is bearish here again on the weekly, bullish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute, and quite a few downside targets of a few percent downside, so not a great picture. Over in Asia, we'll start with the Nikkei. Been quite a lot of volatility on the Nikkei of recent weeks. We're below on the weekly, below on the daily, and below on the 60-minute, and we do have downside targets, quite worrying levels here. So new lows on the Nikkei would be very, very bad. And if we take a look at China, China is still one market that does concern me. Bearish on the weekly quite clearly now. We've just failed to recover, and this does look like it's got potential to fall further. Bearish on the daily, bearish on the 60-minute. We see here that we are seeing downside targets there. And if we take a last look at the Indian market, a lot of Indian investors signing up to Updata at the moment. So we start to cover India a bit more, and we see here bearish on the weekly, bullish on the daily, but mixed on the 60-minute. And just be aware of these targets. But some very impressive long-term targets still for the Indian market. That's it for this week. Until next week, happy charting. See you then.